Lake Louise is one of Canada's most breathtaking ski resorts. It's also one of Canada's most historic. Today, with a skiable acreage of 4,200 acres spread across 3 mountain faces and boasting 9 lifts, Lake Louise is absolutely incredible. But what's the story behind Alberta's largest ski resort? In this video, we'll trace the entire history of Lake Louise, from its humble founding to decades of growth leading up to the present. Before I begin, however, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Lake Louise Ski Resort for allowing me the use of historical footage you're about to see. I would also like to thank Bill Becker for allowing me the use of his footage at Lake Louise. Both are linked in the description. Please check them out. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The story of skiing around Lake Louise dates back a long time. More specifically, clear origins can be traced back to the iconic Skokie Lodge. Constructed in 1930 by Cyril Paris and Cliff White, the lodge was one of the first buildings to be built of service to skiers in Alberta. Skokie Lodge undoubtedly laid the foundation for downhill skiing at Lake Louise. With the aid of the lodge, Lake Louise began to be used more frequently by skiers. In the early 1930s, the Ski Club of the Canadian Rockies was formed. In 1936, Englishman Sir Norman Watson purchased a controlling interest in the club. Under Sir Watson's leadership, the Temple Lodge was constructed in 1938, further cementing Lake Louise as a downhill skiing destination. In 1947, the club incorporated under the name Ski Club of the Canadian Rockies. This corporation later rebranded as Lake Louise Lifts Limited. Throughout the corporation's early days, Sir Norman Watson provided the majority of the financing for the early ski developments at Lake Louise. Despite Mount Norquay installing a chairlift in the 1940s, it was not until the 1950s when ski lifts appeared on Lake Louise. In 1952, the first rope tow up Silvertip Mountain was inaugurated. 2 years later, in 1954, a $25,000 Palma detachable platter was installed that took skiers to the top of Larch Hill, opening up what's now known as the Larch Run. Both of these lifts ran up the modern-day Larch area of the resorts. In December of 1958, the corporation installed the iconic Von Roll gondola partway up the front side of Mount Whitehorn. The gondola was the first of its kind in Canada and was absolutely monumental in the development of downhill skiing on Lake Louise. In 1960, Lake Louise Lifts Limited attempted to install a second Palma detachable platter on the upper slopes of Mount Whitehorn. This application was initially denied by Parks Canada due to competition concerns coming from Mount Norquay, who had recently installed a single chairlift. Ultimately, the new Eagle platter was installed in 1961. Traveling from the top of the Von Roll gondola to around the spot where the present-day gondola terminates, this lift opened up vast skiing on the front side of Mount Whitehorn. Additionally, a new Palma platter replaced the original 1954 installation on the Temple side of the resort. The original 1954 Palma was refurbished and relocated to replace the original 1952 rope tow. All in all, the corporation now boasted a gondola and 3 detachable Palma lifts. In 1963, Lake Louise Lifts Limited proposed constructing a 600,000, 120-bed hotel directly adjacent to the bottom terminal of the gondola. This proposal was outright rejected by Parks Canada. Lured by the potential of a 1972 Canada Winter Olympic Games, Lake Louise Lifts Limited developed both a men's and women's downhill run on Mount Whitehorn. While the 1972 Canada Winter Games never happened, this did start a legacy of downhill ski racing at Lake Louise. In 1966, Lake Louise introduced a new double chairlift running up the current-day Ptarmigan line. The Murray-Lotta double chairlift was intended to provide the missing link between the Whitehorn and Temple sides of the resort. In 1967, Lake Louise Lifts Limited added the Olympic chair. Also built by Murray-Lotta, and as the name implies, the chairlift was constructed to ease access to the new Olympic downhill runs that had recently been cut. The double started quite a bit higher than the gondola and had a capacity of 800 people per hour, whereas the gondola only had a capacity of 350 people per hour. Due to this, Lake Louise started only running the gondola during busy weekends. Additionally, a new mid-mountain day lodge was constructed, which incorporated the top terminal of the gondola into its design. All in all, these improvements cost the resort more than $500,000. In 1968, Sir Norman Watson sold his majority stake to a group of Canadian businessmen. This group announced that a new Alpine Lift T-bar would be constructed near the Upper Whitehorn parking lot, as well as a new day lodge the following year. In 1969, 3 new beginner trails were constructed, bringing the total trail count from 14 to 17. 1969 was also the first year when Norquay, Sunshine, and Lake Louise introduced a joint season pass. All in all, the 1960s were a period of rapid development for Lake Louise. In just 10 years, an incredible amount of work had been accomplished, and the ski area was way more built up than it was originally. In February of 1970, Imperial Oil Limited announced that they were in advanced negotiations to develop a new base village at Lake Louise. In April of 1970, Northern Development Minister Jean Chrétien and Agricultural Minister Bud Olson announced the preliminary project approval. A long-term land lease agreement was also signed. The project was estimated to cost around $20 million total. A new company named Village Lake Louise Limited was formed, which was directly owned by Imperial Oil and Lake Louise Lifts Limited. Initially, construction on the new base village was announced to start later that year, with the first units being completed by 1971 and the full build-out being completed by 1972. Many people initially praised this development, noting that increasing tourist numbers had placed a strain on Banff, and also stating that since it was to be built on the existing Trans-Canada Highway, wilderness encroachment would be minimal. Other people slammed the development proposal, stating that the parks were already overdeveloped and that no scientists or ecologists had been on the panel that approved the development. Nonetheless, by May of 1970, a full economic and feasibility study were underway. Imperial Oil and Lake Louise still hoped to start construction later that year and remained optimistic on the development timeline. Designed by Vancouver architect Arthur Erickson, Village Lake Louise was designed to include a shopping mall, gas stations, restaurants, and hotels. The ski resort announced that its days of amateurism are over and that it would make significant strides of professionalism in the business of skiing. For the 1970 to 1971 ski season, while no units were constructed, Seasons Pass sales increased over 55%. Imperial Oil was even ready to purchase Lake Louise Lifts Limited if approval was granted. However, in January of 1971, Jean Chrétien announced that the public hearings would be held before any final approval of the project was given. As he did not announce a timeline, developers were kept anxiously awaiting. This was good news for groups who opposed the project and who had been trying to get more information from the federal government to no avail. A hearing was eventually announced for April that year. After the hearing, the plan changed drastically. Rather than being located directly on the Trans-Canada Highway right below the ski resort, the development would be located east of the hamlet of Lake Louise. Additionally, no high-rise buildings would be present, as was directed in the master plan. In light of the pending approval, in 1971, Imperial Oil announced a new double chairlift, which would roughly parallel the existing Eagle Palma lift. This lift was installed in the summer of 1971 and drastically improved the experience reaching the ptarmigan chair. By January of 1972, the public was made aware of the details of the $30 million development. Village Lake Louise called for consolidation. It called for the gradual elimination of facilities in the current Lake Louise hamlet, including the iconic Chateau Lake Louise, which would have been removed. The public was extremely divided on Village Lake Louise. Some saw it as necessary development in an already developed area to ensure that other areas of the parks remained undeveloped. Others saw it as a further degradation of the wilderness. Several environmental groups joined together to oppose the development, which the federal government characterized as distorted. Even the Albertan provincial government, under Peter Lougheed, publicly came out in opposition to the project. Finally, in July of 1972, Jean Chrétien announced that the federal government would be completely rejecting the $30 million Village Lake Louise proposal. Village Lake Louise was a major turning point for Canada's national parks. Slowing development in the Bow Valley, this proposal activated huge public input resulting from compromise along different power levels. Village Lake Louise helped to formalize the public consultation program in parks policy, and it also challenged Ottawa's control on Alberta's national parks. In direct response to this decision, Imperial Oil, which had already purchased Lake Louise Lifts Limited at this time, announced that they would be pausing the installation of another Mueller double on the large side of the resort, which had already been ordered for 1972. They were not sure on the future of Village Lake Louise or whether a smaller, scaled-down village could be constructed at all. It is interesting to note that the Chateau Lake Louise Hotel commenced winter operations in 1973. It had been a summer-only resort up to this point. The large double was finally installed in time for the 1973 to 1974 ski season. Additionally, a new base lodge at the bottom of Whitehorn named Whiskey Jack was constructed. In 1976, Lake Louise Lifts Limited installed a Mueller T-bar from the top of the Olympic chair to the summit. That same year, they also installed a Murray Lauded triple chair that ended closer to the Whitehorn Bistro, providing easy access from the base to the mid-mountain. The Whiskey Jack Lodge was also doubled in size. In 1978, backed by Liberal MP Jack Horner, Village Lake Louise once again proposed developing a base village near the bottom of the resort, claiming that Alberta was rapidly falling behind in the tourism industry to places like Switzerland. Horner pushed Parks Canada to build a smaller, scaled-back version of what would have been more acceptable for Banff National Park. Parks Canada, while agreeing to review any proposed development, told Horner that the only ones that would be seriously considered were those that conformed to new environmental guidelines. However, scaled-down proposals began to be drawn up in late 1978. These processes were hindered by the threat of a landslide on Mount Fairview, though eventually the mountain was deemed stable. By February of 1979, Parks Canada officials had indicated that they would accept modest enlargement proposals for Lake Louise that would see the increase of overnight capacity from 900 to 3,500 beds in the next 15 years. Unsurprisingly, 10 of Alberta's major environmental groups banded together to stop the project. One group, the Bow Valley Naturalists, even went so far as to call for the complete removal of the ski resort and the chateau. The modest development hit another snag in March of 1979, when Parks Canada announced that additional visitors into Banff National Park would critically endanger the grizzly bear species. Even reportedly, skiers were divided on this modest proposal. Half favored it, the other half did not. Then, in November of 1979, the federal government announced that there would not be any development at Lake Louise, a move which shocked the developers. The 1980s brought huge changes for Lake Louise. In December of 1980, Lake Louise Lifts Limited was the recipient of 2 takeover bids from private bidders in Calgary. The company, which was publicly traded, had 1.3 million shares outstanding at the time and operated the ski resort through a wholly owned subsidiary. It was later revealed that the 2 offers were from none other than Ralph Scurfield and Charlie Locke. Both parties offered around $13 million to take over the ski resort. At the time, shares of the company were trading at $5.50. Scurfield offered shareholders a deal of $10 a share, though Locke said he would outbid Scurfield. In a last-minute purchase bid in March of 1981, Scurfield made an offer to purchase shares at $15.50, outbidding Locke's offer of $14.60. However, since Charlie Locke already purchased over 50% of the shares of the company, Scurfield was unsuccessful. Lake Louise was in the control of Charlie Locke. Later that year, Scurfield purchased Sunshine. By December of 1981, Locke had announced a new plan for Lake Louise, which would include 5 new lifts and expanding skier capacity by 33%, from 4,500 to 6,000 daily skiers. Locke was hopeful that this plan could be enacted within 5 years. However, the area experienced an extremely slow start for the 1981 ski season, experiencing a severe drop in Christmas crowds from 66,000 people to 25,000 people. This expansion was ultimately approved in 1982, to the delight of skiers and the ski area management, who installed the Paradise Triple Chair up the backside in time for the 1982 to 1983 ski season. However, more environmental groups began calling into question the efficacy of overdeveloping the mountain, citing concerns with the grizzly bear population and snowmaking. In March of 1982, the Olympic double saw a derailment from a tower after a boy was swinging a chair. Ultimately, no one was seriously injured, but 3 people were treated by ski patrol. It was also during the early 1980s when Lake Louise began to be pushed as a suitable venue for the rapidly approaching 1988 Winter Olympic Games. Ski experts from across the world praised the mountain while decrying the other alternatives, such as Mount Sparrowhawk or Mount Allen. Environmental groups, such as the Sierra Club, protested fiercely against the proposal, stating that the Olympics would cause irreparable harm to the mountain. This was ultimately what led to the decision by the government to omit any Banff area resorts from Olympic consideration. During the 1980s, inflation was bad for everyone, but especially ski area operators in Banff National Park. Parks Canada had mandated price controls on rates for everything, ranging from hotels to lift tickets to bike rentals. This left Lake Louise in a financial predicament in 1983 when, after having installed the Paradise Triple Chair, could not raise the lift ticket price fully to compensate for the new investment. It was in 1983 that the Government of Alberta announced the development of a downhill ski area on Mount Allen for the 1988 Winter Olympics. This was to the decry of virtually everyone, from environmentalists to skiers to ski area operators. Many people were upset that Lake Louise was under no consideration to be used for the Olympics. Officials stated in 1984 that a computer had found a super ski run on Mount Allen that was superior to the course at Lake Louise. The 1980s were overall a tough decade for the Alberta ski industry. Inflation was rampant, expenses were through the roof, and skier numbers were down. In response to the new ski area on Mount Allen, Charlie Locke had shelved $20 million worth of expansion plans until he could see the impact the new ski resort would have in the market. As Ralph Scurfield, owner of Sunshine, stated, "The years of spectacular growth are over. To get real again, we need to have population growth in Calgary." While most ski resorts did end up shelving many plans, there were some improvements, including the reconstruction of the historic Temple Lodge on the backside of Lake Louise in 1986. The reconstruction allowed for more seating indoors and outdoors. Partly in response to the dire economic situation, in 1985, the federal government distributed $6.9 million to existing Alberta ski hills for improvements. It was also in 1985 when an Edmonton woman sued Charlie Locke and two other employees after a serious injury when unloading a chairlift. Speaking of chairlift mishaps, one night in 1985, the tension system for the Mueller-built Eagle Double completely failed, causing the motor room to slide forward and tip on the rails. This lift was promptly repaired. In 1987, Lake Louise proposed a $4 million chairlift that would provide a one-seat ride from the base to the top of Eagle Ridge, near the unload of the Paradise Chair. If it had been approved, the saddle quad would have been a massive lift spanning over 3,000 meters, rising 855 vertical meters, and with an estimated capacity of 2,800 skiers per hour. Parks Canada had concerns regarding the construction of the lift and outright rejected the proposal. Environmental groups had also fiercely lobbied against the construction of the lift, stating that Lake Louise can still be reclaimed to its natural state, but will be lost forever if the high-speed chair is built. By the late 1980s, the situation in the Banff ski resorts had become critical. Aging facilities and limited on-mountain infrastructure were driving skiers elsewhere. Lake Louise had seen a resurgence since the abysmal 1982 ski season, but was still sputtering when compared to other Canadian ski areas, such as Big White. This all came to a head in 1988 when Charlie Locke threatened to permanently close Lake Louise in August of 1988 unless he would gain approval for the expansion and modernization of lifts, facilities, and snowmaking. Many thought this was all a bluff on Charlie Locke's part. However, the threat seemed to work as, in August of 1988, Parks officials backed the idea of a new chairlift at Lake Louise, eventually granting full approval for two detachable chairlifts in a slightly different alignment in 1989. This approval came directly after Norquay's $10 million expansion approval by the federal government. With the unveiling of the Friendly Giant Quad and the Top of the World Quad, Lake Louise essentially doubled their base area capacity to over 5,000 skiers per hour. Yan Lifts was chosen for the manufacturer, as their $4.5 million bid for two lifts came in slightly less than Doppelmayer's bid. Charlie Locke also purchased part of both Wintergreen and Fortress. One more notable chairlift incident happened in 1989 when a crane dropped the bull wheel of the original ptarmigan chair on a truck during a new bushing install. The 1990s at Lake Louise started off with a minor Yan detachable chairlift accident after a weld failed that connected the chair to the grip. This sent 4 people to the ground. Thankfully, this happened while the chair was in the bottom terminal. Had it happened in the middle of the lift line, it would have been much worse. In light of this event, Charlie Locke stated that he still had no regrets with purchasing Yan detachable equipment, noting that the manufacturer did a full inspection after the incident. After building the two front-side detachable quads, in 1991, Charlie Locke immediately proposed to add two new lifts on the backside, Richardson's Ridge and Wolverine. The Wolverine chair would have followed one of the old pommel lifts near the Temple Lodge, which was dismantled in 1982. Richardson's Ridge would have opened up more intermediate terrain on the backside. Of course, these two lifts came under the scrutiny of environmental groups, who stated that the lifts would be eyesores, would create barriers to cross-country skiers, and would threaten grizzly bear habitats. Lake Louise received approval to build the Richardson's Ridge lift, and they began tree clearing later that year. However, as other priorities, including a new ptarmigan chairlift, came up, Lake Louise shelved these plans. The only other notable thing that happened in 1991 was an explosion that completely destroyed a maintenance building. Thankfully, no one was injured. 1992 saw the original Von Roll two-person gondola finally decommissioned. In its last years of operation, it had been relegated to summer-only use, setting the low capacity and aging technology. Rather, the friendly giant quad remained open for the summer, with gondola cabins even being added to the lift. In light of rising accidents on the slopes due to reckless skiing, the RCMP began to send officers to the ski slopes on the lookout for dangerous skiers. This was a new program, and it was met with some success. In 1994, Charlie Locke unveiled plans to build a 280-room hotel in the village of Lake Louise, which would accommodate as many as 850 people. Parks Canada indicated that this proposal would not receive approval, as the site was already designated for housing. Locke ended up suing Parks Canada in an attempt to stop them from building housing in the village. Locke had already operated the much smaller Great Divide Lodge on the BC border and offered to remove the lodge and reclaim the land if he were granted approval for his hotel. Ultimately, he was not granted approval. In 1995, Charlie Locke announced that he would operate Nakiska. This brought Nakiska onto Locke's growing mountain pass, which granted access to Fortress, Wintergreen, Lake Louise, and Nakiska. In December of 1995, after Whistler's infamous Quicksilver chairlift accident, and in light of the British Columbian government-mandated closures on all Yan detachable equipment, Lake Louise closed both lifts while a thorough inspection could be completed. In March of 1996, cracks were spotted on a few chairs on both detachables, which prompted the resort to remove all affected chairs. Despite the setback, Lake Louise stated that their lifts differed in design from Whistler's Quicksilver lift and that multiple tests indicated that the lifts were completely safe. However, new grips from Pole X West were manufactured and used by both Silver Star and Lake Louise on their Yan detachables. In 1997, citing increasingly bureaucratic red tape for development in Alberta, Charlie Locke purchased Fernie Snow Valley in British Columbia. Locke added Fernie to his growing pass, which included all his resorts as well as Marmot Basin, Panorama, and Mount Norquay. Locke purchased both Kimberley, BC, and Stoneham, Quebec in 1998, and acquired a 99-year lease for Mont Sainte Anne in 1999. However, Locke did continue to invest in Lake Louise, constructing the impressive Lodge of the Ten Peaks in 1997. Locke continued to spar with environmental groups who vehemently opposed his Richardson's Ridge expansion. Despite this, Locke replaced the aging Lodge double with a new detachable quad from Italian manufacturer Littner in 1998. The original double was relocated to Kimberley to serve a new terrain expansion. When the resort aimed to increase the quad's capacity from 1,200 to 1,800 1 year later, environmental groups decried the proposal, citing the development board's ruling that the lift couldn't exceed 1,200 people per hour. Despite the environmental pushback, the lift was eventually upgraded to 2,400 people per hour. This all came as several environmental groups declared open war on Charlie Locke and his counterparts at Sunshine, Norquay, and Marmot Basin. As Stephen Legault, vice president of the Alberta Wilderness Association, declared, national parks are about fostering a close relationship with the natural world. Ski areas, with their dependence on facilities and the manipulation of natural processes, just don't fit in that picture. They cannot exist in the parks in the long run. In 1999, Federal Heritage Minister Sheila Copps announced that all new ski area guidelines would be implemented for national park ski areas. First of all, the new guidelines prohibited any new development if a ski hill was operating at their maximum skier capacity. Lake Louise had a maximum capacity of 6,000 skiers per hour and reportedly operated right below that number. The government indicated that there would be no increase in the maximum capacity of the ski area. Second, Under the new policy, even minor modifications required a complete environmental review and federal approval. This was demonstrated when the resort attempted to modify a dangerous section of the Juniper Run by removing several trees, which was opposed by all environmental groups and required full federal approval. Finally, under the new guidelines, Sheila Copps revoked the previously accepted Richardson's Ridge expansion, which had been approved and partly cleared since 1991. More bad news came for Lake Louise in 1999 when Parks Canada announced intentions to close the summer gondola at Lake Louise due to a thriving grizzly bear population. While the summer gondola was never shut down, the resort eventually erected a fence and banned people from wandering in the area below the Whitehorn Bistro during the summer months. In 2000, Lake Louise sought approval to remove 100 trees in response to an FIS report that stated the trees posed a danger to ski racers. Parks Canada delayed approval of the tree cutting, citing the environmental impact of the removal. The ski resort announced that if it could not cut down the trees, they would have to cancel the upcoming World Cup men's and women's downhill races, which could cost the province up to $6 million in lost tourism revenue. Ultimately, facing pressure, tree clearing was granted by Parks Canada. In 2000, Lake Louise upgraded the old Glacier Triple Chair to a new Littner-built high-speed quad. The lift did not replace the problematic Friendly Giant Yan quad, but rather ran beside it, with Friendly Giant being relegated to weekend operating status. Charlie Lock's Resorts of the Canadian Rockies began to develop financial troubles in late 2001. After a slow start to the season left the company unable to make payments on its $148 million debt, Lock announced that he was filing for credit protection and looking into divesting properties. In July of 2001, Canadian billionaire Anne-Marie Edwards bailed out Resorts of the Canadian Rockies directly after Camp Fortune owner Robert Suderman's offer to purchase the troubled company was denied. In August of 2001, Edwards' bailout offer was accepted and the company was under his control. Charlie Lock still remained in an important role in the company, though he was now under Murray Edwards. In 2002, RCR invested in a new 6-person Littner Palma detachable chairlift. This chairlift replaced the problematic Yan-built top-of-the-world quad, which eventually ended up being sent to Iran. In 2003, RCR made the decision to permanently close the Wintergreen ski hill after an especially bad ski season. Matt Mosteller, Senior Director of Business Development at RCR, stated that this decision would allow for more resources to be directed at profitable resorts. After another dismal ski season, RCR shuttered Fortress in 2004. In light of poor weather and low skier turnout, Edwards imposed strict cost control measures at Lake Louise. Under this system, any expenditure over $2,000 were required to be personally approved by Edwards. The Temple Lodge was shuttered and grooming schedules became more sporadic. Lock began to contemplate a transition out of the ski industry. In 2004, despite the cost cutbacks, Lake Louise replaced both the Yan Friendly Giant Express and the Mueller-built Eagle Double and Palma with a used Palma gondola, relocated from California. The removed Yan detachable was the last of its kind operating in North America and had become too unreliable and costly to run. Additionally, the old Olympic Double was retired, though the lift remained standing for almost 2 decades past its last turns. In 2006, Parks Canada unveiled new site guidelines for national park ski resorts that relaxed restrictions on development, however, still banned any new on-site hotel or condo development. This came several years after a study was launched that stated Banff ski hills were among the least competitive in the country. 2008 saw Anne-Marie Edwards sell half his interest in the Lake Louise ski area back to Charlie Lock. Doing so enabled Edwards to better concentrate on real estate opportunities in Fernie and Kimberley. Under this agreement, Lock would have complete operational control over Lake Louise, which would be operated independently of RCR. After this deal went through, Lock replaced the Yan-built Ptarmigan quad with a newer Littner Palma model. Around 2012, Charlie Lock's 2 daughters, Robin and Kimberly, began to take positions of leadership in the resorts. By 2015, the pair both became vice presidents of the company. This cemented the Lock family legacy in the ownership of Lake Louise. It was also in 2012 that Lake Louise replaced its old Doppelmayr-built Sunny T-Bar with a series of beginner-friendly magic carpets. In 2013, the RCMP restarted the program where they would patrol the ski slopes in uniform during off days. This program had been stopped after its initial run in the 90s, and it's unclear how long this iteration lasted. In June of 2015, the ski resort released draft site guidelines, which drastically altered the footprint of the mountain. Under these new guidelines, the resort's leasehold would decrease by 669 hectares, while the resort would develop areas such as West Bull, Hidden Bull, Richardson's Ridge, and West Juniper. Additionally, the daily capacity would be doubled from 6,000 to 11,500. Obviously, environmental groups were completely opposed to this amendment, along with other groups and organizations. However, by August, Parks Canada approved the amendment to the master plan without any major changes. In 2019, the ski resort announced the first stage of its long-range master plan. This plan included the addition of the West Bull terrain, Richardson's Ridge, Lower Juniper, and a new Sunnyside chair. New lifts would be constructed, as well as upgraded facilities. In 2020, West Bull was added along with a new Doppelmayr Summit quad, replacing the precarious Summit platter in a much shorter alignment. In 2021, the new Juniper Express chairlift opened, servicing a handful of intermediate runs. As of the time of writing this video, a Doppelmayr 6-person bubble chair is under construction, which will load from the top of the Lower Juniper chair to the bottom of the Summit chair. This chain will provide another link from the bottom to the top of the resort, and will continue to build upon the legacy of Lake Louise. Finally, the long-proposed Richardson's Ridge lift and expansion is expected to debut within the next few years, along with a dedicated beginner chairlift. Lake Louise is perhaps the most beautiful of any of Canada's ski resorts. The mountain has a long history of downhill skiing and has seen many ups and downs throughout its life. Its history and its legacy is an iconic fixture of Alberta's ski resort industry, and its importance in the development of Alberta's ski culture cannot be overstated. I would finally like to thank the Lake Louise Ski Resort again for allowing me the use of footage in this video. I would also again like to thank Bill Becker for the use of his footage. I'm Skier72, and this is Mountain History. Thanks for watching, see you next time.